Welcome to another episode of Israel at War. I have back with us Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who's the Siggy Ziering Institute director and a professor of Jewish studies at the American Jewish University, as you know, an author of many, many books and very well-known speaker. And I never thought that here on October 15th, 2024, we would still be discussing the war in Israel. But here we are. And Michael, take it away a year onwards. What do you have to say?
I'm going to begin with an uncharacteristic joke. And joke is because humor is a way in which people handle very difficult situations. The joke comes, and everybody has to understand that I'm a scholar of the Holocaust, and I take the Holocaust deeply seriously. But one of the ways Jews very simple joke to tell an even street corner, and one says oi, the other one says oi oi, and the third says oi oi oi, and the fourth person says, gentlemen, if we're going to talk about politics all day, I'm leaving. And that is that when we think about the situation, we ask the question, is it oi, is it oi oi, is it oi oi oi? And the incredible thing is that here we are at the end of a year, not having brought anything to a conclusion, on the verge of Israel is engaged in three active wars and one potential war, and none of them have brought resolution. So let's look at what we've seen. Number one, the situation in Gaza has stabilized. In that sense, I'm reminded of the army term snafu. Snafu is the abbreviation for situation normal, all effed up. And we're in a snafu in the following way. Israel is having to enter areas that it left because there is no strategy for prolonged occupation and the like. It has severely injured and wounded and shattered Hamas's infrastructure, but it hasn't eliminated Hamas, and it hasn't captured Sinwar. It's killed the people around him, but it hasn't captured Sinwar. And worse of that, it hasn't brought the hostages home. And not bringing the hostages home means that, in a very real sense, that problem endures. And in all probability, Sinwar is surrounded by hostages, and the decision would have to be made. If you want to go after Sinwar, are you prepared to be involved in the execution of the hostages, either accidentally by Israeli forces or actively by Hamas forces? That's situation number one. There is periodically a talk that they will exile Sinwar to, in one sense, probably the Sudan, borrowing the strategy that led to the 1982 evacuation of Arafat and the PLO to Tunisia at that point. Situation in the north is a very different situation, but a very interesting situation. And that is that it's clear that Israel had planned, probably for years, for how to respond to the north, because its actions have been deliberate, its actions have been significant, its actions have yielded very, very concrete results. And the other element in the north that is also true is that in the north, the Hezbollah does not enjoy significant support in elements of the Lebanese population. And consequently, with the wounding of Hezbollah, that gives some hope and some joy to elements in the Lebanese political structure. And the question is whether that will yield results. But here also, Israel has decided that after a very, very prolonged series, a year in which Hezbollah was firing rockets and they were going tit for tat, rocket for rocket, attack for attack, that the situation was unbearable. It added to the war goals the return of the population in the north to their home. It actively engaged. It engaged in a brilliant intelligence move by blowing up the pagers. It destroyed the highest level of leadership in Lebanon. It's now engaged in war, trying to force Hezbollah to fulfill the UN resolution to go beyond the Litani River, and it is trying to destroy the infrastructure that they have created in Lebanon, including in the suburbs of Beirut. And the question becomes whether Israel can succeed in doing that and really have an impact. We see a couple of results that says Israel is having an impact by the idea that there is considerable interest in a ceasefire in the north. Whether that also the
And
south is a different story, but we're seeing that. The other part of it that's interesting is that um, Israel is receiving significantly less criticism for what happened in the north and what's happening in the north and what's happening in the south. It's not like Hezbollah is regarded as the equivalent of the poor Gazan population, even though people are being murdered, are being killed, and a whole range of things are happening on the ground, and about 1,500,000 people have been forced to evacuate their home. Now, the reason they've been forced to evacuate the home is also interesting. It means that, in essence, Israel has issued warnings that it will attack in a certain region. Please get out of that region, and therefore, but that creates chaos and havoc and unrest, etc., in in all of Lebanon and stresses and strains the entire infrastructure of Lebanon.
could we
Is
could we just clarify something now? Now, Israel also issued evacuation orders in Gaza. So I understand what you're saying. The difference is that now in Lebanon, there's political pressure on the leaders of the country. Country is kind of in quotes here in terms of Lebanon, whereas that didn't happen in Gaza with the evacuation orders.
Gaza, remember that Hamas was also the governing body. And the other thing is there's much more room to move in Lebanon than there is in Gaza. And there's also less constraint. Hezbollah is not enforcing do not evacuate and the like,
The way
uh,
Hamas did, yes.
the way Hamas did. So it's a different situation. The question becomes in both wars is we understand how they begin. And my father always, and my father had been for 4.5 or 5 years in World War II, had Bronze Stars and all of that stuff. My father said the question is not always how you enter, it's how and if you leave, and how and if you remain, and what that is. And Israel has yet to articulate a clear strategy in Gaza and has yet to articulate a strategy balancing the war in Gaza with the hostages, though the hostage case is now significantly diminished. And probably we're also talking about fewer people who are still alive, tragically. And it hasn't yet told us what its ultimate strategy is in Lebanon and whether that will trigger something. Israel is also at war with Yemen because the There are rockets being fired from forces in Yemen. It obviously is not going in on the ground, but it is responding strongly. We also have the anticipation of an Israeli response to a attack from Iran. An attack has Iran has sent 300 missiles and drones in April and 200 missiles in I guess it's probably last month by
Yeah, I
now.
think it's probably September.
I'm losing a sense of time in September. And Israel has vowed to respond, and the question becomes, again, to use the administration terms, proportionate response and what it's going to respond to, and whether it's going to be the oil fields, which would send convolutions in oil prices, or the nuclear thing, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's ultimate ambition, or whether it's going to be military targets, which is the preference of the Biden administration. We're now also 20 days before the election in the United States. And consequently, everything that is happening in the Middle East has to be balanced by whether it's going to tilt in one direction or another enormously tight election. And the other part of it, which my Israeli friends say, for several days, may have been even weeks, but not many weeks, Israelis were fearful of an Iranian attack and they were in imbalance. Do I go out to the theater tonight? Is tonight the night? And not the night that I go out to dinner and have a leisurely evening with my wife, but is tonight the night we have an attack by Iran, which they knew was coming? And now the shoe's on the other foot. Everybody knows that Israel is going to respond. The question is when to respond, and clearly they wanted the Israelis wanted the day of Yom Kippur to pass.
Yes.
Uh, the day of Yom Kippur to pass, and for those Jews listening to us, you have to remember that Israel has one day of holiday in Torah, which is the Hebrew anniversary of the October 7th massacres. So I would not be surprised if that is the date chosen for the attack on Iran. And I think Bibi is under considerable pressure from the American administration to make sure that at that point we don't start quotation marks World War III or a global conflict of great magnitude before the election, because, well, the Prime Minister of Israel may prefer Donald Trump. It's clear that the Biden administration, uh, Kamala Harris, or completely, as an administration, completely prefers Kamala Harris. And the assumption also is that any number of these conflicts must reach resolution by January 19th, 2025, because you don't want to confront a new president of the United States, whether it be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, with an unconfirmed Secretary of Defense, an unconfirmed Secretary of State, and the like, with a wartime situation. We know that the war of 2008 and early 2009 ended on the eve of Barack Obama's inauguration, which was the other intricate series of timetables and the like. Let me say a couple of things about October
Okay, I just
7th,
wanted to
and
clarify
also
again wait, Michael, let me just clarify one thing that can confuse people. Simchat
do
Torah in Israel is the day before Simchat Torah and the diaspora, so it's a little bit confusing.
in Israel, you have a division between you have no division between Shmini Atzeret, the eighth day of assembly and Simchat Torah. They're the same day. And in fact, in Israel, the religious rhythm from the ecstatic joy of Simchat Torah, the completing of the reading of the Torah, the beginning of the reading of the Torah, the dancing of Hakafot, the celebrations and the like, and all of a sudden they knock on the table and they say Yizkor. You remember we say Yizkor on each of the three festivals, and on Yom Kippur, the memorial prayers for one's parents, and one switches from ecstasy to remembrance of those who are closest to us. And this year, that will be enormously significant because remember, we have 1,400 additional people who were killed on that day. 1,200 were killed and 200 plus were taken captive, were killed on that day. So when you say memorial prayers, you can only imagine how deep and how shattering they're going to be. So the mood is that brings me to what I wanted to say about October 7th. Jews have ordinarily always marked events in Jewish history on the Jewish calendar. So we don't give you the date of when the temple was destroyed by July 23rd. We give you the date the temple was destroyed by the 9th of Av. We always put it. We also don't celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, on the 15th of May. We celebrate it on the 5th of Iyar. And consequently, the most interesting thing is the deep resistance in Israel to calling it by time because the pogroms of October 7th becomes an impact of the pogroms of October 7th becomes an impulse to such opposites in your mind at the same time. So this is something that's going to be observed, has been observed, and going to be observed in secular time rather than in Jewish time.
To repeat that once more,
and the so,
just the explanation because our sound kind of went off. So why is going to be
let me
observed?
say, Jews have always put into the Jewish calendar the events of Jewish history.
Yes.
So we celebrate Tisha B'Av not as July 23rd, but as the 9th of Av, which varies on the Gregorian calendar from year to year. We commemorate Israel's Independence Day not on the 15th of May, but on the 5th of Iyar. We put them into a Jewish calendar. And you know, Jews like to joke that the Jewish holidays are always either late or early.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yes.
year they happen
To
to be
be late.
late. The reality is they're always on time, but they're on Jewish time,
Yes.
not on secular time. So what I'm saying is that October 7th, which occurred in Israel on Simchat Torah, cannot be put in as Simchat Torah because the conflict between Simchat Torah and what happened on the pogroms of October 7th is so great that nobody wants to deal with that angst. Let's also say one final thing, and then we'll answer your questions, which is that we still have not come back to. There's a great feeling in Israel that at least now they're on the offense, not on the defense. But they still haven't provided what Israel was supposed to be able to provide, which is the sense of security for the Jewish people, because they are still embattled and facing rockets on a constant basis, deaths on a constant basis. and also sons and daughters going off to battle and going off to war on a constant basis. And this is now just about equal, if not exceeding, the War of Independence in terms of length and duration. And by the way, but not in scale of loss. The War of Independence in Israel cost 1% of the population. Now, for Americans, 1% of the population should be conceived of as the equivalent of 3.5 million people. 1% of the population in Israel was 6,000 in a population that was 600,000 uh, uh, people at the moment of the establishment of the State of Israel. Put it succinctly, we're in a mess. We're in a mess with unclear strategy. But at least with regard to the North, it's clear that they have war gamed it and they knew what they were doing, which I suspect when we come back to the Board of Inquiry of October 7th, we're going to come to the conclusion that they never war gamed it. They never war gamed the war in Gaza, and certainly never war gamed the war in Gaza with hostages under their thing. And the military and the intelligence service are going to have to bear responsibility for that, because it comes back to the idea that they overestimated their own capacity. They severely underestimated the abilities of those who would attack Israel, and they overestimated the capacity of the wall at the Gaza border, which was breached in some 40 places. In the same way in which in the Yom Kippur War they overestimated the capacity of the Bar-Lev line, and in the same way that the French overestimated the capacity of the Maginot line
in World War II.
in World War II. So,
Can I just say a couple of things about what you just said?
nobody's come out of this looking good.
So on October 7th, my husband and I went to the Nova Music Festival exhibit here in LA. And there were many heartbreaking things, but
Well,
one of them is a video
let
statement
me
by the.
let me only correct you for one thing. They make it very clear that it is the Nova exhibition, because they don't want to use the word music festival with Nova because of what Nova has come to represent.
Explain.
Those the Nova exhibition is an exhibition of what happened at the Nova Film Festival, at the music festival. They don't use the word music and festival. Nova has become its own symbol, its own shorthand for language. They have also done something which is, again, remarkable, especially at this moment, because the line they use is, "We will dance again."
Yes.
We will dance again, which is an answer of optimism and hope, even if one doesn't feel like dancing at this point in time. But they're using that language. But I think it's those of you who are listening to this who have not gone to Nova, it's been extended in Los Angeles. Go see it.
It's extended to
It's an
November 3rd. It's
extraordinary.
the second extension.
So the answer is don't wait. It is, and I say this as somebody who knows just a little bit about museum exhibitions, having done
He's
them
kidding you. He's kidding you. Okay, go ahead.
all over the world. It is an extraordinary exhibition that will break your heart.
I've done two separate podcasts about it. One the other day with the chief of staff. But what I wanted to say about the exhibit in this context was two interesting things about what you just said. One was listening to the after statement of the commander of the Division of Police, in which they fought only with handguns against AK-47s, etc., which As Michael knows, my husband was officer in military intelligence in the U.S. Army a long time ago. I mean, how can you be prepared for an invasion of Gaza with handguns? That's number one. Number two, how could you have female observers on the bases with no weapons and not listen, has been reported extensively, to their intelligence, my to what they saw happening? And as my husband was an intelligence officer, he knows how intelligence officers aren't listened to. So here these women spotted all this activity and no one listened to them.
If you weren't going to trust the women, you should have put a goddamn man in that seat.
Okay, Michael, I'm going to fight that out with you, but
By the way, I say this because you and I were both in the audience when Naftali Bennett spoke at Temple Beth Am. And Naftali Bennett said that he had been against women in combat roles until this war, when he saw the performance of women in combat roles and the male chauvinism that is present, I suspect, not only in the Israeli army, and the male chauvinism that's present in the intelligence field as well, meant that the women saw what they saw, reported what they saw, tragically, catastrophically, irresponsibly, stupidly. They weren't listened to.
and they
And,
died because of it.
and they died because of it. And even worse than their dying, lots of other people died because of it. And uh, again, the idea that you would put an intelligence people on the front lines without the ability, without trusting them enough to listen to them, is irresponsibility of the highest order. It's malfeasance, it's malpractice, it's irresponsible, and I don't have enough words with which to condemn it. But I think that you see that all the way through. The other thing you see at the Nova exhibition, which is so anger producing, you see how long people waited for help. If you have an army that has helicopters and airplanes, they should be, and something the size of Israel, which is the size of the state of New Jersey, they should be able to be there in minutes, not in hours and days.
Do
And
you
the
do you have any inside knowledge? I mean, Mitch and I discuss, my husband discusses all the time about why didn't the IDF respond? You know the story of the woman tank, all female tank who are up north and they rode their tank. My husband trained in armor before intelligence on roads rather than regular tank track, whatever it's called, and rush south and save people. Why wasn't the army there? Even the Nova Music Festival doesn't answer that question. I mean, the music festival exhibit.
the well, they in one sense they can't, because the answer to that is enormously painful. The army had been deluding itself. The problem was on the West Bank, that they had controlled what was happening in Gaza, that they had an enemy that was afraid of responding. There are all sorts of mistakes that were involved, which is one of the reasons politically why the people in power don't necessarily want to end the war that quickly, because they understand that once the war ends, then all hell will break loose as people ask these questions. Everybody else in the higher echelon of Israel has accepted responsibility, except Israel's prime minister. And again, we feel it most acutely on Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur, and we heard the same sermons, you and I, on Yom Kippur, the idea of repentance is to recognize the error, to confess to the error, and then to ingrain how deep the error is so that you do not repeat it in the future. And if you can't recognize the fault and it's somebody else's fault, then you're not going to be able to behave differently. So we feel this acutely at this moment in time, in the aftermath of what we saw. But let's tell our listeners and our viewers that the Nova exhibition is something that they should and must see. It is going from here to Miami, and you don't miss it. As an exhibition, it's powerful. As a recollection of the event, it's enormously impactful, and it will break your heart. But sometimes it's very important to have your heart broken.
And what I would like to add about that is that friends of mine have said that um, they just can't subject themselves to it. And I say the opposite. You must go. You don't have to listen to every video, those things that you find too painful. Some of the things you've heard that message where the terrorist calls his parents and says, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. This is not going to be new to you. But the creativity and the imagination, and even the little bios with each of the festival goers killed that day, some of them were amazing heroes. I mean, they could have saved their own lives and they didn't. They saved others and they paid with their lives. And so we do honor. I'm trying to convince people who are not convinced by Michael, who you should be convinced by Michael, but it's our duty to do honor to those people. And then, of course, the pictures of the hostages. And I just want to say this, and I said this in another podcast, the creativity when you come out of the main exhibit and there's what's called the healing room, and there are little tables and you can sit, and there are boxes of Kleenex. I've never seen that in an exhibit, and I thought, how sensitive to understand this is emotional, and yet we must do it.
Yeah. Well, I had a conversation many years ago with one of my children about visiting someone in the hospital who was dying. And my child said, I can't do that. It will make me feel terrible. And I said, it should make you feel terrible, but that's not the issue. The question is, you have to visit that person because they need you and you got to pay the price. You have to face this history because it happened and it is very important to understand and to see, and you have to pay the price of doing that. So people who say I can't take it and like I have a little bit less sympathy for than they might want. But having said that, it's worth seeing. And again, the response to it, which is the wars that we're experiencing, shows how difficult it is to respond to an event of such magnitude. Where do we go from here? I'm an expert on the past, less of an expert on the future. I can only say that one doesn't know what's going to happen in Lebanon. One does not know what's going to happen in the succession of Hezbollah leadership. Sinwar is in an interesting position, something I'm not quite fully understanding the political implications, except that Israel could do it because Sinwar shared power with two other leaders of Hamas who dealt with he had the military thing, but they dealt with the political. Those leaders were killed by Israel, so they have yielded all power to Sinwar. If they can't get Sinwar, then that's a problem. If they can get Sinwar, then the question is who replaces him and what happens
Yeah,
with and the like. And again, they've decimated the entire leadership of Hezbollah and the like, but they're not going to quite defeat the idea. And one has to ask the question always, with especially in Gaza, have they not created new members of Hamas with greater rapidity than they eliminated old members? But they have to destroy the infrastructure. You know, we've been in Israel a couple of times, and my wife has the app that shows the rockets falling. And if you look at where the rockets are falling, and where they're coming from, you see something quite astounding as to the capacity of both of these militaries, despite both of these military forces, despite the fact of what the price that they paid. So that's where we are at this point. We never imagined we would be here at the end of a year because Israel, again, the 6 Day War was, as its namesake, 6 days. The Yom Kippur War, with all of its difficulties, was 23 days. The interesting thing to look at politically is that after November 5th, the Biden administration will have no restraints on its behavior.
Either way.
No restraints on its behavior in terms of what it wants to do, because the election will have been cast. Whether it will be decided or not, I leave to political pundits to say, but the election, the votes will have been in. And also, in that sense, the prime minister of Israel will have little sway over an American administration. Either way, either if Donald Trump is elected, then he may want to hold out for Donald Trump coming in, but Joe Biden will have no obligations to Bibi Netanyahu, and certainly none to Donald Trump. If Harris comes in, he will be uncertain as to what Harris, Vice President, then President-elect Harris, will respond. So he will be in uncertain territory, and Joe Biden will have a freedom of action without any political consequences that he's not enjoyed up till now. And again, I want to stress that the only person or the only party in the equation that has a strategy which may be an unrealizable strategy is Joe Biden.
Mm.
And his strategy, I'm not sure it's realizable, and it's not only a question of whether it's realizable, whether it's also realizable by him as a lame duck president. His strategy is essentially to bring Saudi Arabia into the equation, to have Saudi Arabia is demanding, in one sense, that there be a political process with regard to the Palestinians with new leadership, because only an anti-Semite and anti-Palestinian could believe that the people of Palestine have the leadership that they deserve. And consequently, and this goes back to the Coates book as well.
Mm.
Coates writes as if the Palestinians have no agency, as if there wasn't the possibility of, we could now be in the 24th year of a Palestinian state. We could now be in the 24th year of a Palestinian state if there had been agreement with President Clinton and Ehud Barak. We could now be in the 16th year of a Palestinian state if Mahmoud Abbas had accepted the offer, which included 97% of Palestinian land, up to 97%, if he accepted the offer of Ehud Olmert. And we could be now in the 86th year of it if the acceptance of two states had come back in 1937, when the two-state solution was first proposed, in 1948 when it became an actuality. So it's not like the Palestinians have been without agency in this. And it brings us back to Abba Eben's terrible remark, painful remark. The Palestinians have never lost an opportunity to lose an opportunity. And that becomes something that is tragic for everyone in the Middle East.
And in the rest of the world, too, because what happens in the Middle East affects all of us.
That's correct.
So, with this, I think it's a good time to end. These days are really fraught. Was I worried during Yom Kippur? Yes, I was terrified that we would walk out of Seoul at the end of Nila and find terrible news. That didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods in terms of Israel's safety and our safety as Jews in America. I just wanted to say, do you want to add anything to what individuals can do to help Israel besides money, donating, volunteering, writing letters to the Wall Street Journal that their editorials are positive about Israel and their news stories are so slanted I get hysterical almost every day. But
And number one, visit. Number two, donate. Number three, express support. And number four, keep discussing and concerning yourself with this. Um, we're in for a long time, and deep and endurance and fortitude have been virtues in Jewish history.
that's true. And we're still here, Michael,
That
after everything. That
that
prayer that we read in the services, that named all the different Baba Yar, that city in Germany, Mainz, I probably didn't pronounce it right. And we're still here and we're going to stay here. So I thank Michael